Hi, folks. Hope you're well. You have just heard from Dr. Moranges about how to use surveys to assess character pedagogy. I'm going to talk to you about how to use the more familiar methods of assessment, but before, like tests and quizzes and that sort of thing. But before I dig into that, in this video, the primary thing I want to talk to you about is deciding whether what you need is a survey or a course-based assessment. So you might need a survey if you want to publish scholarly research on pedagogy. Closely related to this is this third bullet point. If you want to study a group of students over multiple years, which is an understandable thing to want to do when you're studying character development, because ideally it continues for multiple years after the initial learning experience. You usually are only going to want to study a cohort if you want to publish research about it. Theoretically, you might want to do it just to improve institutional practices, but usually you're going to want to publish. Okay, so another reason why you might want to use a survey is if you want to see trends in the growth of your group, like did the group become more grateful? Did they get better at self-compassion? Did they develop a stronger sense of purpose? Rather than understanding how did a particular student learn and grow over the course of the course. And if that's useful because it tells you as a teacher if the overall student experience, the overall classroom experience is doing what you want to do. So that tells you more about your effectiveness rather than about individual students and their efforts and engagement and all that sort of thing. And then last but not least, surveys, I think, can be really useful for measuring dispositional learning outcomes as opposed to skills and knowledge learning outcomes. And we'll get to why that is in a little bit. Okay, so those are reasons why you might want to use a qualitative or a quantitative survey. You might want to use a course-based assessment. That might be a paper or a demonstration or a test or a quiz, one of those more familiar tools, if you want to use the assessment to generate a grade. So many of us are required to generate grades through our classes. So we don't want to have different assessments that are used for grades and then design a whole other set of assessments that are used for figuring out what students are learning. We want to keep those together if at all possible, especially because that keeps the grading from being just some arbitrary thing. The second is if you want to use your assessment as a learning activity. So let's say you know that students learn an awful lot in the process of writing a paper or doing research on an exemplar or in practicing modeling some kind of dialogue strategy in a way that they probably aren't going to learn that much from a survey. And that's when you might use one of those course-based assessments. Also, if you want to give normative feedback. So if a student writes an essay, you can say, have you considered so-and-so's position on, or I have the following questions, or maybe develop this idea further, or reflect in addition on the following questions. You can do that guidance, whereas you can't really give people a whole lot of guidance on their survey results. And then last but not least, just as surveys are pretty good for measuring dispositional change, I think course-based assessments are way more effective at understanding skill development for reasons that we'll get into later, but basically consist of the fact that with skills development, you really want to see some kind of demonstration, and that's hard to capture on a survey. All right, so now I'm going to give you all a moment to just think through that question. Is what I need a quantitative or qualitative survey, or do I need some other kind of course-based assessment? Thank you.